ever felt alone before? I'm not talking about a time when you were by yourself and you were isolated from everyone else. I'm talking about a time when you were surrounded by people and yet you still felt alone. I remember walking to a classroom surrounded by people and yet I still felt alone. I wasn't alone. There were people all around me, but I didn't know anybody. I didn't feel like I had a friend there, and I felt like I was the person that stood out. It usually happens also when we stand up for something and we don't follow the crowd and we do something the opposite of everyone else is doing, and we feel like we're alone. You know, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there were 3 guys that felt that same way. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And it's a Sunday school story that we're all familiar with. But I want to take a different look at it today. You know, these 3 guys stood up for something that they believed in. They stood up for the one true God. Now, the king at that time was King Nebuchadnezzar. We're going to call him King Neb for short. But King Neb was a guy who wanted everyone else to bow down and have a corporate worship of just this one golden statue. And so he had this one golden statue built 9 stories tall. And when the music played, everyone in the kingdom was supposed to bow down to this one statue. Everyone did, with the exception of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 guys stood up for what they believed in. They were surrounded by people, all sides, but yet they probably felt so alone. They were isolated. They felt like there was no one else around that believed what they believed. And so this made King Neb not real happy. And so he called him to him and he wanted to know what was going on. And so he talked to him and gave him another chance and said, hey, you know, if you don't do this, you're going to burn in the fiery furnace. And he gave them another chance. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's reply is like so fantastic. It's like, you know what, you can give us 1,000 chances, but it's not going to change our minds. Even if our God decides to not save us from the fiery furnace, we still won't bow down to this fake God that you've built. And so the music plays and they get the chance to bow down again, and they don't. So King Neb has them fired up 7 times hotter than what they normally fire this furnace up at. It's so hot, in fact, that the guards that are going to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in are killed just from being around the heat. It is that hot. Now, if you've ever been around a fire that big, a fire that bright, is usually blinding. When you can't look at it directly, it hurts your eyes. Well, what's really interesting is after the guards throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in, and they check out and see what's going on, there must have been some kind of viewing window for them. They start looking and they see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego just hanging out in there, and then they see this 4th figure appear. And this 4th figure, the Bible describes as glowing inside of it. And that's really interesting, that it glows that bright, that they can see this figure over and above the fire that's going on around them. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were never alone. God was always with them. And sometimes in our lives, we go through fiery trials. We go through times where we feel like we are so alone. We go through struggles where we feel like there's no one else with us. We go through times where we are going against the grain. We are standing up for what we believe, and we feel like we're alone. But God never leaves us. When we go through times like that, when we go through fiery struggles like that, God is always there in the fire with us. And His light shines brighter in those times than what it seems like in any other times in our lives. But we have to open ourselves up to realize that God is there. We have to look for God being there. And God shines so bright during those times. There's something very interesting about fire. In the process of melting silver down, they would melt it down for 2 reasons. The first reason was to melt it down so they could pour it into another mold to do something else with it. But the other reason was to get all the impurities to float to the top. And they would take and they would skim that off the top of it because they wanted the most purest metal they could use for whatever they're going to make. The fires in our lives have a tendency to do that to us. They will remove the things that God doesn't want in our lives. Sometimes it feels like we're going through struggles in our lives and we don't understand why. And we ask God to remove those struggles from us. And sometimes God does remove them from us. Sometimes God delivers us from those things. And in the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, He didn't deliver them from the fire. He allowed them to go into the fire. But the cool thing is, God was with them in the fire. And in our lives, when we go through struggles, sometimes God will remove us from those fires. He will remove us from those struggles. But when He does it, He promises to always be there with us, just like He was in the fiery furnace. He does some of His best work in those moments where he burns out the impurities, he burns out the things in our lives that he doesn't want there. And he molds us and shapes us into more of what he wants us to be, the image of his son. So you may be going through some really tough things this week or this month. You may have a season of your life where things are just terrible right now. Embrace those things. Embrace them knowing that God is doing something in you. That if God doesn't deliver you from them, God is with you in the fire and he's doing something in your life. Something so amazing. It's very interesting when you look at a mountain. We like those mountaintop experiences where we're on top and things are going great. We don't like the valleys where we're in the low spots of our lives. But yet if you look at a picture of a mountain, the growth, the vegetation doesn't happen on top. That's usually just a snow-capped part of the mountain. The vegetation happens in the valley, in the ways down the slopes. And it's the same way in our lives. It's in those valley experiences, in those struggles, in those fires. That's where we grow spiritually. But we have to turn our eyes to God and look to him and say, God, if you're not going to deliver me through this, I trust that you're going to be in it through it. That's us having confidence in God. It's believing that God is going to do what he said he would do. And that's what I want to leave you with today. Have confidence that God is going to do what he said he would do. Trust him that he is going to do something in your circumstances. Trust that he's in the fire with you. He never leaves you. He's always there with you, with it, through it, during it, and on the other side of it. And when you get to the other side, you can stand back, you can say, wow, God, you did something so amazing in me. And sometimes he does something amazing through us. And he never wastes a thing. Some point down your life, someone else is going to go through a struggle like that. Something that you have already went through. And you will get to share your experience with them. And you will be able to minister to somebody else. And that's where it becomes awesome. When we get to share our experience with somebody else of what God did in our lives and encourage somebody else. So here's my challenge for you. I want you to take what you're going through today, maybe this week or maybe this year, maybe this season of your life, and trust God with it. Have confidence that God is going to do something in your life through it, that he's there with you and you're never alone. And here's another part of this challenge. Take some of the things that you've been through and give God permission to use them to minister to someone else, to encourage somebody else, to love on somebody else, because they need that as well. Thanks so much for being a part of our BNC family.